Tom had always been fascinated by the mysteries of the universe. As he drove his car across the country, he often found himself gazing up at the stars, wondering what other secrets the cosmos might hold. One night, as he was driving through the barren deserts of the Southwest, he saw something that he couldn't explain. A bright glowing object appeared in the sky ahead of him, hovering silently above the desert. At first, Tom thought it might be a helicopter or a drone, but as he got closer, he realized that it was much larger and more mysterious than anything he had ever seen before. It was a UFO, a flying object that defied all logic and explanation. Tom's heart raced with excitement and fear as he pulled his car over to the side of the road and got out to get a better look. The UFO was completely silent, and there was no sign of any aliens or other life forms around it. It just hung there, hovering above the ground, as if waiting for something. Tom watched in amazement as the UFO suddenly shot off into the sky, disappearing into the darkness above. He stood there for a few moments trying to process what he had just seen. But as he got back into his car and continued his journey, Tom began to feel a sense of dread settle over him. He couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched, that the UFO was still out there somewhere, waiting for him. As he drove through the dark desert night, Tom's mind began to play tricks on him. Shadows on the side of the road began to look like alien creatures, and every sound seemed to be a warning of impending danger. And then, just as Tom was beginning to think that he was imagining things, he saw the UFO again. This time it was much closer, hovering above the road just ahead of him. Tom slammed on the brakes, bringing his car to a screeching halt. The UFO just hung there in the air, its bright lights casting an eerie glow over the surrounding desert. For a moment, Tom sat frozen in fear. He couldn't move, couldn't even breathe. And then, without warning, the UFO began to move towards him. Tom's heart pounded in his chest as he tried to start the car, but it wouldn't turn over. He was trapped, alone in the desert with the mysterious UFO bearing down on him. As the UFO closed in, Tom could see that there was something strange about it. It wasn't just a shapeless object, but rather a sleek metallic craft that looked like it had been designed with a specific purpose in mind. And then, just as the UFO was about to collide with his car, it suddenly shot off into the sky, disappearing into the darkness once again. Tom sat there in his car, shaking with fear and confusion. He had no idea what had just happened, or why the UFO had come so close to him. Over the years, Tom's encounter with the UFO haunted him. He could never shake the feeling that he had come face to face with something beyond human understanding, something that was watching and waiting for him. He became increasingly paranoid, convinced that the UFO was still out there somewhere, lurking in the darkness, waiting to strike again. In the end, Tom's obsession with the UFO consumed him. He became a recluse, living alone in a small cabin in the mountains, surrounded by his research and his notes. He never spoke to anyone about his encounter, and he never ventured out into the world again. But as he sat alone in his cabin, Tom couldn't shake the feeling that the UFO was still out there waiting for him, and he knew deep down that he would never be free from its grasp. Lila had always loved the outdoors, so when she heard about a remote campsite deep in the woods, she knew she had to check it out. She packed her tent, some food, and her trusty dog Max, and set out on her adventure. The hike was long and grueling, but Lila pushed on, driven by the promise of a beautiful secluded campsite in the heart of nature. As she set up her tent and built a fire, Lila felt a sense of peace wash over her. She was completely alone, surrounded by the quiet beauty of the wilderness. But as night fell, Lila began to feel uneasy. The woods were eerily quiet, and even Max seemed on edge. Lila tried to shake off her unease, telling herself that she was just being paranoid. But then she saw it. A bright light appeared in the sky, illuminating the entire clearing. At first, Lila thought it was a shooting star, but as the light grew brighter, she realized it was something else entirely. The light was coming from a UFO hovering silently above the treetops. Lila couldn't believe what she was seeing. She had heard stories of UFO sightings before, but she never thought she would actually witness one. As she watched in terror, the UFO began to descend, hovering just above the clearing where Lila and Max were camped. The light was blinding, and Lila felt as though she was being pulled towards the object by some unseen force. Max began to bark frantically, as if he could sense the danger. Lila tried to grab him and run, but her legs wouldn't move. She was frozen in place, transfixed by the bright light above her. And then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, the UFO shot off into the sky, disappearing into the darkness. Lila was left alone in the clearing, trembling with fear. As she tried to process what had just happened, Lila realized that Max was gone. She searched the woods for hours, calling out his name, but he was nowhere to be found. In the days that followed, Lila became increasingly paranoid. She could feel eyes on her everywhere she went, and she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. The once peaceful woods now seemed sinister and dangerous. Lila never found Max, and she never returned to the remote campsite, but she couldn't escape the memory of the UFO and the fear it had instilled in her. She became afraid to leave her house at night for fear of seeing it again. The memory of that fateful night haunted her for the rest of her life, a constant reminder that there were things in this world that she would never be able to understand. Sarah and David had planned their trip for years. They were both passionate about sailing and had always dreamed of making the journey across the North Atlantic. They had spent countless hours researching their route, reading up on the weather patterns and potential dangers, and carefully selecting the perfect boat to make the trip. As they set sail from Nova Scotia, the couple was filled with a sense of adventure and excitement. The wind was strong and the waves were high, but they felt ready for anything. They sailed through the day, taking turns at the helm and enjoying the stunning views of the ocean around them. As night began to fall, they retired below deck to rest. David had just fallen asleep when he was jolted awake by a strange sensation. He sat up in bed trying to shake off the grogginess, but as his eyes adjusted to the darkness, he saw that something was very wrong. The stars above them flickered in an unusual way, and a strange light appeared on the horizon. At first, Sarah and David assumed it was just another sailboat, but as the light grew closer, they realized that it was something else entirely. The light was coming from a strange, disc-shaped object hovering above the water. Sarah and David couldn't believe what they were seeing. The object was huge, with bright flashing lights that seemed to pulse in time with their heartbeat. As they watched in horror, the UFO began to move towards them, the bright lights illuminating the entire boat. Sarah and David tried to radio for help, but their communication equipment was jammed. The object hovered over the boat for what felt like hours, the lights blinding them and the ship rocking violently in the waves. Sarah and David huddled together, terrified and unable to move. The object appeared to be scanning their boat, moving back and forth above them, and then came to a complete stop. Suddenly, a beam of light shot down from the UFO, hitting the water next to the boat. The light grew brighter and brighter until it engulfed the entire ship. Sarah and David were thrown to the floor, feeling the intense heat from the light. They tried to shield themselves from it, but it was too much. As the bright light engulfed them, they screamed in terror. The heat was unbearable, and they felt as though their bodies were on fire. Suddenly, everything went black, and they both lost consciousness. When they awoke, they were lying on the deck of their sailboat. The night sky was above them, and the ocean was calm. They sat up, rubbing their heads, trying to make sense of what had just happened. The bright lights were gone, and the UFO had disappeared. Sarah and David looked at each other, both unsure of what to say. They were both trembling with fear, and their bodies were covered in sweat. For the rest of their journey, the couple felt an eerie presence around them. They would hear strange noises at night, and sometimes catch glimpses of the bright lights in the distance. They couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. When they returned to land, they were both changed. They no longer talked about their journey across the North Atlantic with excitement and joy, but with a sense of unease and terror. They could never forget the strange encounter they had in the middle of the ocean, and the knowledge that they were not alone in the universe. Thanks for watching today's video. Please consider subscribing and hitting the like button. It really helps us out, and until next time, stay safe and never wander too far from the light.